Ladies and gentlemen. On behalf of everyone at JNF UK, I would like to welcome you to the first in our Voices of Israel series. We appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to join us tonight. I am Ilan Gorgi, the Interim Chief Executive of JNF UK. JNF UK has been working in the Negev for decades, building and developing communities so that they can grow and thrive. There are no fitting words to sum up the destruction and devastation that many of these communities have suffered. We are all reading stories in the news, but can only imagine the nightmarish ordeal our brothers and sisters in Israel faced as soulless terrorists entered their homes. Through our connections to people on the ground, this series of talks will bring you a range of Israelis who have either been directly impacted by the unprecedented crisis or are working tirelessly to make a difference to the lives of so many that have been affected. Our first guest speaker is friend, Professor Jonathan Dekel-Chen. Jonathan is the Rabbi Edward Sandro Chair in Soviet and East European Jewry at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem, where he holds a dual appointment in the Department of Jewish History and Contemporary Jewry and in the Department of General History. He is a frequent commentator and interviewee on Eastern European affairs and the Middle East for media outlets that include the BBC, Associated Press, Reuters, The Washington Post, Bloomberg, Radio France, The Voices of America, and many others. But tonight, Jonathan has come to speak with a different hat on, the hat of an innocent Israeli whose home and life was torn apart on 7 October, and with the hat of a loving father who is campaigning relentlessly for the safe return of his dear son Sagui, who is also a cherished JNF UK employee. JNF UK first met Jonathan Sagui through the Bikurim Performing Arts School in the Eshkol region of the Negev. The Dekel-Chen family together approached JNF UK to help them establish a world-class music school in the desert, with a dream of giving gifted musicians from Israel's peripheries the chance to realize their artistic potential. Visionaries Jonathan and his 2 sons, together with Tamar Kedem Simantov, established this school in 2014 with the help of JNF UK, which has now expanded to train students across the performing arts spectrum. Most tragically, Tamar, her husband, and beautiful children, friends and neighbors of Jonathan's on Kibbutz Nir Oz, were brutally murdered on October 7. Sagui made a great impression on the JNF team, and shortly after meeting him, we were lucky enough that he joined our team in Israel in 2015 and has been an integral part of the impact we have had to the lives of so many in the Negev and Galil. We are praying for his safety and waiting for his return back to his immediate family and also his JNF family. His calm, positive personality, coupled with his wisdom and intellect, together with his enthusiasm and devotion to his country and people, is missed daily, and we hope that he will be back with us very soon. Before I hand you over to our guest speaker, please note that there will be a short Q&A session, depending on the time at the end of the discussion. You can submit your questions at any point during the discussion into the Q&A chat located on the Zoom control panel, which is probably at the bottom of your screen. I will now hand you over to Jonathan. Jonathan, thank you for joining us tonight. Why don't you maybe begin by telling us about what life was like before October 7? Speak a little bit about the kibbutz and your lives before, obviously, what happened.
Well, good evening to everyone, and thank you to Ilan and the rest of the JNF UK team for asking me to speak with you and your audience this evening. Kibbutz Nir Oz, which is my home and the place where Sagui grew into adulthood along with my other 3 kids, is in a way kind of the fruition of what certainly once was the Zionist dream, making the desert bloom. It was a relatively small kibbutz, about 440 people altogether, multi-generational, but really in a growth spurt for the last few years as young families, including Sagui, came back to the kibbutz once they started having children and to raise their kids as they had been raised beforehand. So I was lucky enough to have Sagui and his younger sister and their children on the kibbutz with me. And the kibbutz had a very large cooperative farm We in Nir Oz were part of what one could really call the breadbasket of Israel, at the leading edge of high-tech agriculture and many other agricultural businesses. And there were people like myself who worked outside of the kibbutz, in my case in Jerusalem at the university, but there were people who worked in many other places, but all of us contributing back our salaries to the kibbutz. Um, the kibbutz itself had been on the ground since the mid 1950s. All of these kibbutzim in the Gaza envelope were created between roughly 1946 until the middle to late 1950s as a human presence around the Gaza Strip and to promote Israeli agriculture and a new kind of Jewish culture, for that matter. For me, I had been on the kibbutz since 1981 with a small hiatus while I helped create another kibbutz in the Golan. And it was the joy of my life to bring up children and now grandchildren in what, for all intents and purposes, was a kind of ideal life and one of great belief, of great faith, and really patriotism, because we fully recognize that not only would we be the breadbasket of the country, but also, in a way, the first line of defense between Gaza and the heart of the country. What we didn't expect, of course, was what happened on October 7th, even though since 2007, roughly since Hamas staged a coup and took over the Gaza Strip, we had experienced many, many rounds of fighting, of rocketry, of mortar fire, attack tunnels. But what happened on October 7th was something totally different.
Yeah, thank you, Jonathan. I think that's it's important for people to also understand. You know, I get a lot of questions as why do people live there, but what you described is very clear, and it's a beautiful message. Unfortunately, you did point, you've kind of moved forward to what happened on October the 7th, and as much as you can, I know that you were abroad at the time, which probably saved your life. Just tell us a little bit. I mean, I don't really want you to sort of, relive everything, but just tell us a bit about how you came to hear about what was happening. Maybe if you like, a bit about the events around Sagui, and then maybe more generally about the kibbutz and the impact on the kibbutz, which I know was heavily impacted on October the 7th.
Yes. Well, I will try to be direct and not ramble on too long. As you mentioned, Ilan, I was in the United States when the attack occurred. I was on my way to an academic conference, actually, in the United States. And the night of October 6th was staying over in Baltimore, Maryland, for those of you who know it. And so hopefully attending the next day, October 7th, the wedding of a child of a dear friend of ours, myself and my wife's. Early on October the 7th, got a message from a friend in the United States who I guess couldn't sleep that night, and telling us that she had seen on the news that something very big was happening in our region. I immediately, of course, turned on the news and started calling my kids on the kibbutz to try and understand what was going on. By the time I called them, the assault was well underway. The Hamas assault on our kibbutz. I was not able at that time to communicate with Sagui or with his wife, Avital. So what I can tell you now is a reconstruction, a very accurate and really, I would say, comprehensive and authoritative retelling of what happened that morning on Kibbutz Nir Oz. And it is shockingly similar, this story, to what happened on many other kibbutzim around the border area. And Nir Oz itself is situated about 1 mile from the border fence. So roughly 1.5 kilometers from the border fence. If one were to run from the border fence to the kibbutz, it would take about 7 minutes. The assault on the kibbutz by Hamas was mechanized, meaning that on board pickup trucks fitted with heavy machine guns, motorcycles, and cars, once they breached the border fence, the Hamas terrorists were inside of the kibbutz within about a minute and a half. So whatever happened on our kibbutz and the other kibbutzim, it was totally without warning. Sagui got up that day very early to go do what he does best, which is to create and to build. He has a pet project, it kind of say in the United States, a moonlighting project. He's an entrepreneur with his wife, and his love is to refit old buses, municipal buses, and airport buses, the old-time airport buses, and to remake them into usable objects. He had already created small groceries, mobile groceries, to provide food to food deserts in Israel's south, where we live. And that morning, he was going to work on a new kind of vehicle, a refashioned bus. He had signed a contract with a Israeli nonprofit to create a mobile technological classroom, or two of them actually, that would move through Israel's less served communities, much like what JNF UK does, and to provide technological training in Bedouin communities and elsewhere. This was right near the kibbutz machine shop, which is a couple of 100 meters from our residential area. And he, very shortly thereafter, about 6:30 in the morning, spotted the first group of terrorists that had penetrated the kibbutz, and he put out the alarm to the rest of the kibbutz, including to our first responders. And for the next 2 hours, Sagui, in that call, he and others informed people that they should get into their attached bomb shelters. Our kibbutz and every other kibbutz in the area had attached bomb shelters to every home, because, as I said, since 2007, we've had to endure many, thousands of rockets in the aggregate and mortar shells. And so these bomb shelters were built onto our homes in 2008. The infiltration of the terrorists was accompanied by a massive barrage of rockets, so that everyone was in fact forced into their bomb shelters, except for the first responders, who was their job to try and ascertain what was happening on the kibbutz and to engage with the terrorists where they could. What Sagui and this handful of other young men realized very quickly was that it was not just this one group of terrorists that had penetrated the kibbutz, but something in the order of 170 to 200 heavily armed, well-trained terrorist commandos had simultaneously broken into the kibbutz and had begun immediately executing anyone they could find on the kibbutz, and taking captives any other people of all ages, both those who were murdered and those who were taken captive. And in the end, 28 people, as of now, fortunately there will be more, but 28 people were murdered on our kibbutz that day, and a total of 80 taken captive. Again, out of a total population of 440, we estimate there were about 400 people on the kibbutz that morning altogether. Saturday morning, holiday morning. Sagui and the rest of the first responders engaged with the terrorists until around 8:30 in the morning. At that point, very few of the first responders were still in contact. We don't know what became of them. Sagui, with another couple of the men who were still in contact, withdrew to their own homes in Sagui for the next 45 minutes or so, until 9:30. Engaged with terrorists in and around his home. And at approximately 9:30, we lost contact. All contact was lost with him. And since that time, 9:30 on October 7th, we have heard no word from him. We don't know his condition. All that we know is that he was taken hostage in whatever condition he was into Gaza, again with another 79 or 80 civilians from our kibbutz. The killing continued until about 1:30 that day. In the wake of these 170 to 200 terrorists came several hundred looters, civilian looters, mostly unarmed, from the Gaza Strip, who looted all property from the kibbutz, from children's toys all the way to all of our farm equipment. Whatever they couldn't loot, they burned. So that our kibbutz, as we knew it on October 6th, no longer exists. It is a burnt shell, and no more than that. The first army units, IDF units, arrived on the kibbutz in the evening or in the afternoon of October 7th. The terrorists had already left the kibbutz. They had done whatever they set out to do. The looters were also mostly gone. The kibbutz was cleared of booby traps, and our people began to be rescued by the army later that afternoon and were evacuated to Eilat. The survivors, the 180 or so survivors, were then evacuated to a hotel in Eilat, where we have been since then. Sort of the shattered remnant of our community. Entire families were murdered, entire families were abducted, and parts of families, like in our case with Sagui. Sagui, for those of you who know him, is a father of two beautiful little girls, and he and Avital are expecting their third girl in a couple of weeks. That is sort of in a nutshell what happened that day, which of course left an entire community traumatized by what had happened. Our children are reliving that day all the time, in both children and, in my case, grandchildren. And the community and communities just like ours up and down the border area are facing the same or very similar kinds of challenges moving forward.
Thank you, and that was quite hard to listen to, but also something that we really appreciate your willingness to share with us, and thank you for that. I know that you've returned subsequently back to the kibbutz. I know you sent us some videos. You mentioned that the kibbutz is completely destroyed. I assume, like you said, there's nothing left at all there for you. Where do you see yourselves now? Obviously, it's still quite raw, and it's still quite at the moment I can feel that your family and those around you are trying to make whatever you can of your lives at the moment. So how has that been? I know you mentioned your family moved to Eilat, but I mean, has the kibbutz stayed together? What has been sort of the last 7 weeks or so? What has been going on with the kibbutz itself? I know that you're very close, not just biological families, but you are almost one family. So what has happened over the last 7 weeks, and how have you been supporting each other? What sort of support have you received? And maybe speak a little bit about where you see the next maybe few months, but also your future, and if you can, for as far forward you can see, maybe share with us, what your thoughts are on that.
Well, I mean, in general, I would say there are far more questions than answers right now.
Yeah.
As I said before, the survivors of the kibbutz were all evacuated to Eilat, to a one single hotel in Eilat. And from that evening, we were embraced by the city of Eilat, but also our grown children from the kibbutz who had moved away over time have really stepped up. And they live in various places around the country. And these are 30, 40, 50-year-old, young and not so old, and not so young, who have really stepped into the breach and are helping us. Heal is probably too big a word right now, but at least cope with the loss and really the displacement. We were displaced from our homes, but also from our property. And there are people and all of their property is gone. My ex-wife, literally, her house was burned to the ground. She survived miraculously, but as an example of many, she has no property whatsoever. So, coping with these kind of challenges. there are government agencies who have stepped in to offer support, mental health support, which is, of course, very, very important. It has not been totally consistent, but I think that as time moves forward and the magnitude of this situation becomes more clear to government agencies, then they have been stepping up their support. As far as our community is concerned, it will be years before the kibbutz is reconstituted. The buildings, right? The buildings, the farm. That could take years, and the government has taken upon itself to rebuild. Basically, it has to be plowed under. Whatever remains there, it cannot be reconstituted. It needs to be built from scratch, rebuilt from scratch. That could take some years. In the meantime, the community very much wants to stay together to the degree that it's possible. And if all goes as planned, most of the surviving community, not everyone, but most of the surviving community will be moving into temporary housing for approximately a year, maybe a year and a half, to a very new neighborhood outside of Kiryat Gat, which is a town that JNF-UK is familiar with, roughly between Jerusalem and Beersheba. And JNF-UK was kind enough to assist us in offering us several units that the JNF-UK owns in that very new housing complex, in addition to approximately 100 others that we have gotten permission to use for that year and a half. And again, we hope by the end of December, we will all have relocated there from the hotel and begin to gradually reconstitute our lives, get our kids back in school. There really has not been an ability to create any routine for our kids since October 7th. And that has been a problem in terms of their mental health as well. So we will renew our communal life to the degree that it's possible, not on a cooperative farm, but in a couple of large residential buildings and some outbuildings as well that are temporarily put there. The longer term plan is unknown at this time. The kibbutz leadership and the younger families are exploring, what will happen a year from now, 2 years from now. It's a little early to say what that might look like, but what is clear, sadly, is that unless something drastic changes in the security situation along our border with Gaza, the vast majority of young families and perhaps the veteran kibbutz members will not agree to go back to live on the kibbutz out of fear that what happened on October 7th could happen again. And so that all of that remains to be seen. Once the kibbutz physically is rebuilt, who will agree to go live there? But that's more of a question for 2-3 years from now. We'll know the answer to that question.
And it will depend on what happens and what, like you say, the security situation would be down near the Gaza border. Absolutely. So that's I don't think anybody will be able to give you any sort of ideas of what that would look like. So, but please God, things will stabilize down near the Gaza border.
Yes, indeed.
I thought if you're willing, just maybe you can. I know that since October the 7th, I watched you on CNN, and then obviously I know that you've been in Washington more recently. If you're kind enough, maybe you can just tell us a bit about the campaign for the release of the hostages, and obviously for Sagui's release, and your efforts and how that has obviously gone, because as well as losing so much of your personal belongings and had to deal with a lot of people that have unfortunately been killed, you have a son that's obviously you don't know where he is, and well, he's kidnapped, but you don't know where and how he is. And so just maybe if you can just tell us of your efforts and how you've been campaigning. I know that it's kind of developed and it continues to develop as we talk. If you can, for a few minutes, maybe just give us some insight into that.
Sure. Well, from the moment that we realized that Sagui had been kidnapped, and it took around a day to realize that he and several others who had not been identified, meaning that no one who survived from the kibbutz saw them being kidnapped, nor did any of the Hamas videos that came out on Hamas social media websites contained any traces of Sagui. And no bodies were found in the kibbutz, strangely enough. Hamas, except for one terrorist who was killed by someone on the kibbutz, it was completely empty of Hamas terrorists who we know were killed during the assault, and our security team. So it it was clear to me that I personally had two jobs that would intersect moving forward. The most important, of course, is to sort of collect the pieces of life for my family, my grandkids who experienced this hell on earth, daughter, son-in-law, daughter-in-law, who also survived, to help the community cope with what it had just experienced, but also knowing what I know about how the world works, to engage to the fullest extent in campaigning for the release of Sagui and what we now know to be about 240 hostages. I mean, it took a while also to understand what the scope was, and again, 80 of them from my kibbutz alone. And these are my friends, these are my co-workers, these are young people who I helped bring up, or little kids who come over to my home with my grandkids to have ice cream. So there was no question that my time moving forward would be committed to doing anything I could think of to help gain their release, and at the very least, keep public awareness laser focused on the fate of all of the hostages, Sagui, people from the Nir Oz community, and the rest of the 240. And many others have, of course, been engaged in this. As your audience may know, within a day, an ad hoc volunteer organization came into being, the coalition in Israel, a coalition of the hostage families, that began engaging in this work way before our government mobilized for it. And so I've been working in partnership with that organization in terms of keeping awareness high, and quite frankly, pressuring the Israeli government to prioritize the return of the hostages at least as much as its other war goal, which is to destroy Hamas, which we, of course, I of course understand. I mean, having lived on the border for since 1990, if not before, I understand completely the need, even before October 7th, to eradicate Hamas as a governing and military organization. My efforts have also led to partnering with a kind of subset of that larger coalition in Israel, which is, there are thousands and thousands of members in that coalition, a more narrow coalition that, again, we're partnered with them, of 10 families of hostages who are also American citizens. They're dual nationals. And using our platform as American citizens to advocate for the hostages with the the Biden administration and Congress. Thankfully, from beginning a couple of days after the massacre, we were all contacted by the State Department, the U.S. State Department, and offered partnership with them. We have met with Secretary of State Anthony Blinken, with President Biden. I was, as you mentioned, in Washington, D.C. last week with a delegation of these 10 families, and we met with many senior Biden administration officials and members of the U.S. Senate Foreign Relations Committee for what I think were important meetings. And so the feeling is that we are partnered with them, and they're doing as much as they possibly can to bring all of the hostages home, not just the U.S. citizens. And they tell us what they can tell us. Honestly, I hope they know a lot more than they're telling us in terms of the pathway towards getting all of the hostages released.
Thank you. I think we'll now maybe take a few minutes before we close, just to look at some of the questions that people have raised. There's a couple of questions that have been sort of pushed through to me. Just thought I'm trying to also make sure we're not just repeating what we've already discussed. One of the questions we received was, did the people who were displaced from the kibbutz receive any humanitarian assistance from international organizations? Obviously, I'm not sure if you're aware that I know, at least in England, but I imagine in many countries around the world, there was a real sort of uptake in people trying to help in any way they could, particularly in sending whatever humanitarian aid that was being requested to Israel. And in the first few weeks, there was, I don't think there was a space where someone wasn't collecting something for Israel. So the first question is, did you receive that sort of assistance internationally, or were you looked after by the government and that's all you really received?
Well, in terms of material aid, the government gave us nothing. I'm sorry to say. The Israeli government was extremely slow in its response to this crisis, not just to our kibbutz, but to all of the displaced communities. I won't go any farther than that. That's simply a statement of fact without any politics. We were really graced with an enormous outpouring of support material and other support from Israeli nonprofit groups, providing us with everything from clothing to toothpaste, and generous with their time, and entertainers who would come and at least try to cheer us up a little bit. In terms of what I would call transnational support, yes, certainly there's been, we've certainly felt that in a variety of ways, support from abroad, in terms of monetary support, and both for our immediate needs and for the longer term needs of reconstituting the community, however that happens. Of course, at this point, we don't really know how to tell anyone what exactly it is that we're going to be doing a year from now or 2 years from now. But it has really been affirming to us to see the level of goodwill and support from diaspora Jewry in the UK, the US, and other diasporas, as well as from the people of Israel. Less so the government of Israel, but certainly the people of Israel. And if there's there's no silver lining here, but if there are some bright spots in this horrible tragedy that's befallen us, it would certainly be in that realm.
Yeah, I think that's the feeling also from here, that if you can look at it with any sort of light, I think that the brotherhood of and the sisterhood of Jews around the world, and in Israel particularly, really is heartwarming. One question, we received a question from a Mark. He writes that he was a volunteer in 1967 in the Kibbutz Nir, which is near Kiryat Gat. Yeah. He's asked, have they been affected by the current events, and are the other kibbutzim, maybe more relevant to what we're discussing, are the other kibbutzim helping each other? Do you find that there's, because of the common sort of pain that you've all suffered, is there a closer sort of bond between the kibbutzim now since October 7, or is everybody sort of trying to survive in their own way within their own communities? Yeah.
Well, the communities that were assaulted they're dislocated, and everyone is dislocated somewhere else. So there really isn't an ability to kind of combine forces. And honestly, at this point, people are more internally oriented. That being said, the kibbutz movement as a whole, there were, let's say, 15, 17 kibbutzim that were affected directly by this assault. But there are another, 180 kibbutzim that were not. And the kibbutz movement as a whole has been really embracing towards those kibbutzim that have been devastated in terms of manpower, in terms of um, helping us strategize what next steps might be. It's very likely, I can't say for sure, but it's very likely that after this interim stay in Kiryat Gat, those many, many residents of the kibbutz who are of Nir Oz who are not going to agree to go back to our original site, 1 mile from the border, will be absorbed into existing kibbutzim in safer zones. And there are ongoing discussions. Honestly, the discussions began days after the massacre of existing kibbutzim that were offering this to us immediately. That large groups it's unclear if one kibbutz can sort of absorb all of the surviving members and residents of Nir Oz, but large groups of them to be absorbed once housing can be created at these kibbutzim. So absolutely, there's been great solidarity shown among the kibbutzim, but not specifically, of course, amongst the affected kibbutzim that are just too shattered to be able to offer much to anyone, even themselves, quite unfortunately.
Absolutely. Totally understandable. I think just one question, maybe one more question. Well, I've got two questions, but I'll pick one of them. Just very briefly, if you wish, and obviously you don't have to. Are you concerned about the hostage deals that are now being spoken about? Whether they'll collapse, whether there will be sort of traction now that will actually see a lot more hostages. I know they're only talking about a small portion of the hostages, but are you encouraged by this, or are you skeptical, or do you have any sort of feelings about what's been happening in the last few days?
Well, I would begin by saying that the goal here is to get all of the hostages home.
Yeah.
The civilians, the soldiers, men, women, children, elderly. That is the goal. In the meantime, what's being discussed, and we have yet to see proof that it will actually happen, is the release of 50 children and I suppose their young mothers. And I would be overjoyed if that were to occur over the course of the next few days. I suspect that many of these young children and moms are from my kibbutz. Just statistically speaking, it would have to be that way because such a large proportion of the children taken captive were from Nir Oz. Either people who lived there or people who had tragically just come for a visit over the weekend with relatives on the kibbutz, sort of in the wrong place at the wrong time, of course. So I would be overjoyed because these are my friends, these are my kids' friends, these are my grandchildren's best friends are now captive in Gaza, and others were murdered on October 7th. I don't know what it means if it in fact happens, this first release. I have no idea what that would mean moving forward because we're dealing in Hamas, not with a government, not with a rogue government, not with a nation state. We're dealing with a barbaric terrorist organization that has no regard for human life, Israeli or Palestinian for that matter. And I would be very cautious. I am very cautious about projecting how this stage of the deal, if in fact it goes through, might be a model or in any way predict what might happen moving forward. But again, the goal is to get everyone home by whatever means possible, whatever means necessary, whether it's through negotiation or through military action. This is a must. It is a moral imperative for our country to bring all of these people home.
Absolutely. I think one thing we see is that a Jewish life is precious, and each and every one is precious to the nation of Israel.
Absolutely.
Jonathan, I think we've taken all the questions for tonight. I'd really like to thank you very much for your time. I know that this period has been extremely challenging, very difficult period for you, and you're extremely busy with all the different things that you're juggling at the moment. And we really appreciate the time that you've taken to speak to us. It's been insightful, heartbreaking as well to listen to some of the things you've had to say. But I think it's very insightful to hear firsthand about the events, and also both the past and the future as well. And obviously spots of hope within all of what you've said that we can hopefully look forward to the future. I believe that we speak for everybody tonight. Or I speak for everybody tonight who have taken time to support us and listen. That our thoughts and prayers are with you and with Sagui, with your family, with all the people that have been impacted, all the hostages, and we all pray that they return safely, that they are safe, and they return safely to their homes. And thank you very much for your time.
Well,
And
thank
also,
you, Paul, and thank you, Elon, and to the staff, and to all of JNFUK for your wonderful support of our family and our community. We're unspeakably grateful.
and we hope to see Sagui with us back in the team. He's had this time off in lieu, so he owes me some time back for the time that he's been off. But we're very much looking forward to seeing him again. And with that, I would like to thank everybody else who joined us tonight. We'll keep you informed of the next in our series, and hopefully we'll have the pleasure of having you all again. But once again, thank you very much. Hope you have a good evening, and Jonathan, hopefully we'll speak soon. Take care. Thank you, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.